All right, a very warm welcome. Hi, everyone. We're very, very pleased to welcome you to our webinar, Resourcing for Success, Best Practices Every Manager Should Know. My name is Nora, and I'm pleased to be your host for this webinar. My passion is to unleash potential of organizations and people by tapping into the future of work and creating more productive, adaptive, human, and joyful ways of working. We're very excited you're joining us today. And before we kick off, I would love to just get a sense for who is here with us today. I invite you to check in via the chat by sharing, number one, where in the world are you dialing in from? And what's inspiring you lately? So we've got Virginia with changing seasons, UK, New Orleans, new features available in Run. Very good. Someone has been paying attention. New York City, San Fran, Berlin. Oh, hello. I'm also in Berlin. Hi, Maike. Lovely to see a fellow Berliner on the call. Oh, Brazil. Wonderful. Houston, Michigan, California, Denmark, Paradise. Awesome. So we've got many people dialing in from the US. And that's very wonderful. A warm welcome to everyone who's here with us today. This is our very second webinar of the brand new series called LEAP, Igniting the Future of Resource Management. With this program, our goal is to reinvent the traditional approach to resource management by unpacking fresh and inspiring perspectives for the community on how this could look like. And through this, we really aim to empower you as resource managers and business strategy leads by sharing very actionable advice that make you better, both professionally and personally, and also help to elevate the role of resource management within an organization by increasing the visibility on the positive organizational impact that resource management can have as a function. And we're running this webinar series on a monthly basis. So make sure to stay tuned. At the end of this webinar, I will already give you a little teaser what's coming up next. And you might be wondering who's facilitating this program. Run as a resource management software and is really dedicated to solving the very intriguing challenge of matching both work to be done and the best suited people for the job. And as someone very rightly called out in the check-in, it's been a very exciting couple of weeks for us. We've just had 3 new releases to make the resource management managers' lives easier. So yeah, that's Run. And up next, I would also love to introduce the star of this webinar, Christine Robinson. And I'm just going to quickly share my screen to share with you a little bit of background while I introduce her. So Christine is a phenomenal person. I've really thoroughly enjoyed collaborating with her to prepare for today. She's absolutely obsessed with resource management. I can definitely confirm that. She's a speaker, she's a writer, a former managing director of resource management at Baker Tilly. But not just that, she's also a mom of 6 lovely kids. She's based in Philadelphia in the US, and also she loves interior design, which I think is very neat. She loves baking and all sorts of adventures. So a very warm welcome, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Nora. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here.
And just a heads up, we'll be using the last 15 minutes for Q&A, so make sure to post any questions you might have throughout the webinar into the Q&A section. And also feel free to use the chat to share any thoughts that you might have, and make sure to send to everyone and not just the speakers so that everyone can benefit from your thoughts and ideas. Wonderful. So Christine, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really lovely to dive into this topic of best practices with you in our prep. And as a kickoff question, I would like to ask you, when we're referring to best practices, what exactly is your understanding of a best practice in the space of resource management?
Thanks, Nora. That's a great question. It's interesting because resource management, I believe, exists everywhere. It's interesting. Nora and I were having a prep call, and I was sitting in Starbucks and thinking about how Starbucks actually also has resource management, right? So there's the baristas and other folks that are playing different roles that certainly have different skill sets. And so what's interesting about resource management is that while it exists absolutely everywhere, it's not exactly as mature in a formal way as some other professions and industries. And so the first thing that I would say is, yes, there are best practices in resource management, despite the fact that that in some industries and organizations it might be new. And what I would say is that the best practices, the fundamentals of resource management, are industry agnostic. And so I'm really excited today to dive into what those are, because I really believe that these are applicable really across the board.
Fantastic. Thank you. Wonderful. And so let's dive right into it. So what best practices have you found most useful over the years? You have so many years of experience. So what's maybe the first one that you would like to share with us today?
I'd say the first and the most integral and basic best practice as it relates to resource management is really drilling down to the fundamental basic, which is the resources that are being managed are people. And so establishing that relationship with the people that are very talented, that are being aligned in different ways, and really understanding how they are motivated and what they aspire to, that's going to be the key to success across the board. Again, an industry agnostic best practice, truly listening. So having a keen and acute understanding of what the pulse is of the organization, what is driving people right now, what are they looking for in terms of perhaps diversity of experience or the evolution of where they are in their career. You know, I certainly have myself personally evolved in many ways, and longevity at an organization is driven by that, right? By the employer really understanding and rolling with the punches of what the employee needs at that moment. And so that is key. The other side of that is building the personal connections with leadership as well, because it's not just the people that are being aligned, right? There's leadership and understanding what those organizational goals are. Many different ways that you can do that, right? But if I had to boil it down, I would say listening. One of the first things that I did when I joined Baker Tilly was embark on I suppose you could call it a listening tour, where I traveled to different, this is pre-COVID, traveled to a number of different offices and truly just listened. I asked some questions around what the perspectives were around resource management, but it was a really eye-opening experience to understand and truly dig into what they believe the process is, what they believed that the process should be, where improvements could be made, what some challenges were, and what they were looking for. So I'd say, to wrap that up, quite frankly, have an authentic, genuine perspective on that and truly care, because when you do that, it makes the job so much more fun.
Amazing. So yeah, the first best practice is around the personal connections with the people being resource managed and building trusted relationships. And you have referred to the key skill of listening, which I think is so key, and authentic care. Can you maybe share an example? You already talked about the road tour trip that you did when you first joined Baker Tilly, which I think is super smart. Did you find any other practical ways to actually establish a trusted relationship with the people?
Absolutely. It's really not much different than in any industry. As you're starting to establish those relationships, it is so much it's so much less difficult when you've established that groundwork of genuinely connecting with someone, having their perspective be heard, not just to check the box to say that you asked the question, but really to dig deep and understand why they're saying what they're saying. For example, I had received some feedback at one point in my career around the team, and what I found was that that really was true in that leader's perspective. However, as I dug a little bit deeper into the feedback, what I realized is that that was their outward experience of what was happening. And there was a solution that was much further down into the core of the process that needed to be iterated on and worked on. And had I not really explored that, it would have been a mistake, right? To not really understand what was going on there and what was manifesting itself in that way. So I would say go to meetings where you're invited, try to raise your hand to understand what's going on in the business that you're supporting. It's the people are an aspect. They're an extremely important, I would say the most important aspect, but the business is essential, right? So a successful resource management function is not, so I think this is a misconception. A successful resource management function is not successful because resource management is successful. It's successful because it is allowing the organization to be successful through the resource management platform, allowing the process to be agile and nimble as the organization meets its organizational goals. And so where I say that, it's really important to understand that resource management and the resource managers, they're partners in the business. They're not in a silo, working in kind of a behind the curtain area. They should understand the strategic goals of the business so that they can execute on that strategic vision. And so I recall an instance of there was a leadership meeting. This was a number of years ago in my career, and the idea was, hey, we're not going to talk about resource management. So this has nothing to do with staffing. So the resource managers don't have to go. And I said, that's exactly why the resource managers need to go, because they need to understand, right? They need to have that sense of where the business is going. It's interesting to really flesh out and make that connection. If you play out an example, if the business, for example, is looking to expand, say, into a new region, and the resource manager, through having one-on-one conversations with individuals, knows that there is a high performer that for family, personal reasons is looking to relocate to that region, that's a perfect opportunity and a perfect segue to raise that and really explore how to retain that top performer. And I've had that example happen at least twice that I can think of in my career, where those two individuals, and I won't name names, but those two individuals ended up being leaders in that space, right? Because they were able to express their own interests and what they had going on. And I would say, going back to our first point, they wouldn't have done that without the trust in the process and having that personal connection to feel comfortable to express their new path.
I love that so much. And the example you shared, just by understanding someone's personal context, what they're trying to achieve and how they're wanting to grow, can help you as a resource manager so much more to be a good partner for the people and the business, and create that win-win by actually retaining that talent inside the organization. I love that so much. And the second very important point, beyond the trust with the people you refer to, is actually partnering up with the business, with the leadership, and to really get their buy-in, which I think is crucial. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit? You gave some very good examples of joining meetings, understanding their context. What else have you experienced works really well to secure leadership buy-in and to break down the silo that the resource management function could potentially sit in?
Definitely. Resource management, I would say that's a pitfall to try to avoid, right? To sit in a silo. There is a huge misconception that I believe, again, is very much across industries, that there is a fear. There is an inherent fear that with resource management comes some sort of big, scary loss of control, and people are going to be sent to do things that they don't want to do, which, quite frankly, I find somewhat comedic, right? Because it's actually the opposite. It's looking to understand where people can be positioned to excel, to succeed, and therefore to do well for the organization. And so in terms of securing leadership buy-in, I would say absolutely the first step would be to establish that trust and really work on cultivating the relationship. But that only takes you so far, right? You need to really be able to articulate the value proposition of what resource management is. It's not staffing. It's not scheduling. Quite frankly, that is the least strategic part, right? That is a piece of the components that make up what resource management is, but really it's that strategic opportunity to understand how the organization plans to evolve,
Beautiful.
what the organizational goals are, and really two key items. One would be how many individuals are needed? If I had to boil it down to something very simple, right? How many individuals are needed? And once you establish that, which is a jumping off point to working with so many other organizational functions, recruiting is a good example.
Yes.
Then it's effectively and efficiently deploying and aligning that talent throughout the course of the year, because you could have a good number in mind of how many individuals are needed, but if you have that right number of individuals and don't appropriately allocate them, that you've only taken the first step, right? That's not going to actually give you the answer that you're looking for. And so really boiling it down to painting the picture for leadership of how the resource management function is going to benefit the organization, is going to align to whatever their strategic objectives are. So for example, if you're speaking with a leader who is focused on doubling the footprint of their practice, that's key information. That's important to know. How can you help them achieve that? Understand how they are planning to, they have some sort of a strategy, I promise you, right? They're not just winging it. They have a plan, and understanding what their steps are is going to help you actualize that vision. So if, for example, they are interested in growing the practice by honing in on and really doubling down on a particular skill set, well, perhaps the resource manager can go back and take a look at who has that skill set, who has a skill set that perhaps isn't that one, but is adjacent to it, right? And could be similar. Perhaps it's something where you can help them understand what is going on in their pipeline. What are they expecting the next wave of work to look like? And how can you match the current population of people to either be upskilled or reskilled to now be able to meet that demand from external clients. And so there are so many strategic ways that we can partner with the business, and none of them are possible without, one, getting your foot in the door by articulating how you're going to assist. The other stuff, the staffing, the scheduling, absolutely, that's part of it. That is the execution of how to execute on the strategy and the vision. But I'd say the key is understand what the leader or leaders in this example are trying to achieve. And by delivering on those and really bringing that value to the table, it will naturally come about that you'll continue to be, invited to these conversations and have a seat at the table.
Yeah, beautiful. And it makes me kind of realize that the leadership is also a human, right? Those are humans, just like the people you're trying to resource manage, both have their context they're operating in. So taking the time to understand both levels on a human level is really going to pay off as a resource manager. Just wondering, Christine, from your perspective, I know that you in your career have also been leading teams of resource managers. In order to do that and to actually be able to, let's say, create that trust, what kind of skills from your experience are most required to act upon that?
The ability to be comfortable with the unknown is paramount. If you're the type of individual who really enjoys having a mapped out layout of exactly how your day is going to go, and you become very flustered if one piece is out of context there, this is probably not the field for you. Resource managers successful resource managers are able to roll with the punches. It's not to say that we don't get stressed out or challenged. If anyone figures out how to avoid that, I'd love to hear, but it's really just saying, look, I have an idea of how we need to progress here, but being able to pivot with the business, that's key to success. When leaders are coming to you for support to help them figure out perhaps a staffing challenge, or there is a mismatch in terms of what the client needs and what appears to be available, right? There's so many instances. Perhaps there's a conflict. Maybe there's someone who's needed on multiple different places at once. Anyone who's a strong performer knows what that feels like, right? And so in those situations, by the time that the leader is coming to you, they're already stressed out. They don't need you to panic on top of everything else, right? So they're coming to you for assistance. They're coming to you for true help. And having that demeanor of being able to understand what is presented to you and being comfortable with sort of the Rubik's Cube of the situation. It's having that personality where there is a puzzle that you're putting together, but you don't have all the pieces, and you're trying your best and you're going to put something together that is actually really cool, but is maybe not exactly what the picture on the puzzle box says. That's a successful resource manager. Because any business will tell you, I mean, there's a lot of forecasting mechanisms. There's pipeline, there's all kinds of inputs that allow us to make educated decisions around things like workforce planning. And I'm a huge proponent of those. I'm not saying we have a crystal ball, but at the end of the day, there is a question mark around a lot of these items, and they can be influenced by a number of different external factors that the organization is simply not in control of. And so if there is a war on talent going on, if there is perhaps layoffs happening, at the industry at large, there are so many different things that can impact what's going on. And so try to control what you can, try to forecast where you can, but at the end of the day, roll with the punches, because it's more fun that way anyway.
Love it. So maybe one key takeaway is also to just breathe every now and then, be resilient, and go with the flow as it presents itself throughout the day, week, and year. I love that. Agreed. Keep your calm. Cool. What else do you have in store for us in terms of best practices?
So it's interesting from a resource management perspective. I have found that as the field matures at varying degrees across different industries, in some organizations, resource management has existed for years, and there are very mature models and reports and structures that have existed, and they're continuing to iterate on those. In some areas, this is kind of this new concept, that they're trying out. I'd say that the best practice that I'd share around that is really the move from tactical, the blocking and tackling, to the strategic staffing. So we started to touch on this a little bit in terms of using data to make decisions, not simply a gut feel around, hey, this person kind of feels like they might be good for this opportunity. That is not the real value that resource management can bring. It is a great starting point, because administratively it can become very burdensome when organizations are growing to that level of not simply knowing everyone by name, right? And not being able to manage these things on spreadsheets. It gets to a point where it's no longer effective. And so it's a great starting point. However, really the value and kind of the flavor of resource management comes in the strategy. So imagine a world where you really understand what the forecast is, whether that is in terms of productivity, utilization, pipeline, what work is coming into play. Maybe this is a consultative type of practice, a professional services organization that has a number of sales individuals. They're going to be informed about these things. Having that connectivity to professional sales or business development is key. That makes perfect sense, right? For resource managers to be plugged in there to understand what's coming. So imagine the power that the organization will have, and the ability to position themselves for success by having an entire team of individuals whose job it is to educate themselves on how to put those puzzle pieces together to prepare your workforce for that next wave. You never want to be in a situation where there's an iceberg in the distance and you didn't see it coming, right? So again, certain things are unavoidable, but if you have information, even if it's the most basic information around, say, scheduling as far as into the future, maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 3 weeks, having that insight and making decisions based on that information is going to help not only the organization be successful, but I firmly believe that it really does help the team member experience to be a lot more robust and successful. You begin to position yourself to have the ability to have real meaningful conversations with people around, look, here's what the next 3 months are going to look like. You've got an opening in your schedule, which essentially is an opening in your career path. What do you want to do?
Right.
Express your aspirations so that we can help align you appropriately. I can't even list one example because there are so many. There are so many, in this industry, but it goes back to the earlier point around being able to evolve with the employee. So I think a mistake is having kind of a static, immovable file around someone, right? This notion of a kind of permanent record, so to speak, of this person doesn't want to travel. Well, this person maybe didn't want to travel, and this is a real example, because they just got a puppy and they want to stay at home for the first couple of 6 weeks, but then they want to move on. They want to do something else, especially if it's a great opportunity for their career, right? So again, it goes back to that people-centric connectivity and having that understanding of who you're staffing, because at the end of the day, individuals who are out in the field are going to reveal a different perspective to someone trusted in the resource management space than they would to perhaps the most senior leader in the organization appropriately.
Right.
And having that insight and using that real time to be agile really is key to not only meeting and I would say very much exceeding organizational goals around productivity, utilization, expansion, all kinds of strategic goals, but also retaining the employees so that you can actually get there. Because I think we all know there is certainly a cost to turnover and a cost to retraining. And so having that data and getting into the habit of making data-driven decisions around forecasting and predicting the future, so to speak, is going to be key. And navigating and really articulating that resource management is not an administrative task. Again, it's very much there is admin, I would say, in any profession. Any profession is going to have some sort of an administrative component. But I really see with the advent of AI technology and so many new tools that can assist with those pieces, that's not the real long game as it relates to resource management. It's the connectivity and having a connected network throughout your organization that is kind of the eyes and ears of bringing together the firm or organizational strategy with what your people really want to do. That is what will help really drive success. And so I think that is a huge piece, along with data. And we could talk about this for hours, and I know we don't have hours. We can also say that skill set tracking, developmental goals, all of this information is important. So if you think 100%. About someone who is going to be really the person that has influence over making the alignment of talent, right? Of course, it's going to be beneficial to arm them with all of this information so that they can make the very best recommendations on these situations. And the other thing that I would say, especially, so I'd say this, there's a correlation between the types of organizations that can really benefit from resource management and the volatility of the nature of those businesses. And what I mean by that is, if your organization is highly unpredictable and kind of dynamic, so I'm looking at consulting organizations, consulting practices, anything that can be, really highly affected in that way. Not to say that other linear businesses also don't utilize resource management. Starbucks was my example, but what I would say is that's where resource management can really be key. And so imagine if you've put in place a resource manager and you've armed them with no information, and then you come to them and say, hey, I need 10 people, I need them in California on Tuesday, and they need to have this, this, and this. You've given them no weapons in their artillery, right, to be able to actually achieve that. However, if that individual actually has the knowledge around the industry, around what your strategic goals are as a leader, they understand your client because you've informed them and you got them involved in the proposal process. So they actually understand what you're trying to achieve here. And also, by the way, they've been connecting with the individuals in the practice. So they know about this one's puppy and this one who just returned from leave. And they know about this other person who is just dying to work on this new industry that happens to align with the new project. And they have all this information. You are positioning yourself to, as a leader, not actually have to do any of that Sherlock Holmes investigation of looking under every rock, but you have someone who is able to very quickly in an agile and nimble way, put together a really strong recommendation that is not only going to meet your needs, but again, going back to the people-centric approach, is going to keep that in mind. And so that's really the secret sauce around how to make this successful.
You have made that point so beautifully. And it's so wonderful to see how the resource manager can be that person to really seek win-win-win situations, right? Making everyone's jobs easier. So I think that's fantastical. And I love your framing around the shift from a more tactical, administrative approach that might be in place for organizations who are getting started with resource management, shifting to a more strategic approach to staffing. So my question here is, Christine, from your experience as organizations start to mature in that space, what are some very concrete steps that organizations can do to become more strategic? Let's imagine an organization started to understand the value of resource management, is more tactically involved, and is keen to up their game. How do they start?
I'd say, and I'm a fan, I don't know if you can see my book back there, Start With Why. So Simon Sinek I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek and his Start With Why concept. So at the end of the day, I think that despite the fact that leadership, might be on board and the resource managers are raring to go, I believe that a number of organizations miss the boat in terms of really explaining the value proposition of resource management. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful if you have leaders that will plug in resource management where they need to be, but without explaining to the people that are going to be engaging with the resource manager what they're there to do, you're missing a key step. So for example, if it's important in your organization, right? So thinking about some of the examples that we've discussed, if it's important to understand the holistic person and what's going on in their life, right? What is going to help them meet their developmental goals, it stands to reason that the resource manager would be filled in, right? Would have those conversations, would have that information, would understand, look, this individual is a fantastic performer. They are, everything they touch turns to gold, and we really want them to, succeed this year. They're up for promotion to manager. We need to ensure that they get the opportunity to work on a certain type of client this year. Well, that's information that the resource manager could not just find useful, but actually help make happen, because it's unreasonable. It's unreasonable in a large organization that every leader is going to understand what every opportunity is across the entire organization at all times. So having someone who has that detail is really an advantage. And so explaining that to the individuals that are in these meetings is going to help them. And it's interesting. I remember I spoke to someone who was probably a young manager, and it was so clear to me that the individual, he did not have, he was trying to do the right thing. He was told to, and again, this is so tactical, but he was told that schedules need to be updated. Fine. So he told his team to update their schedule. He was doing what he was told to do. And when I spoke to him, he kind of just brushed by it as if, hey, it's a check the box exercise, right? We were told to update their schedule, and I told them to update their schedule, and they're supposed to have it done, and they did it. And I said, do you know what we use that information for? And he said, to make sure that we know what the hours look like. And I'm like, that's one piece. Absolutely. But I kind of explained, look, it's the story of an hour, right? So if it's not just 1 hour, it's the snowball effect of it's a couple of hours from these different individuals and what happens to that hour. And when you accumulate all that information, it really gives you a sense of what the firm and the organization is going to do in terms of their performance. Are they on track to meet their organizational objectives, which affects just about every process in the organization, including, things that are near and dear to people's hearts, like opportunities to perhaps get more training or, be able to attend conferences and seminars to, upskill themselves. They're paying compensation, right? There's all of this that's wrapped up in that. And really being able to understand, look, if we believe that certain number of, let's say, work needs to be completed. I'm careful not to say hours, because that certainly does not apply in every organization. It can apply in some, but the body of work, having an understanding of what the body of work is going to be, is a direct correlation then to what we need to do to plan. So how many people are going to be needed, right? So it's really kind of putting it into the hands of the managers to say, look, we're not asking you to update your schedule or your team's schedule because we're trying to create a homework assignment we don't think you're busy enough, right? We're just asking you to do this. We're going to take that information and we're going to see how many people we might need to hire for next year, because we don't want you to be too overwhelmed, right? We need to see if we need to bring in perhaps some seasonal help. You're going to tell us. If I'm the resource, I don't know how many people you're going to need. You have to tell me, right? You have to put your information in there so that I can now make an educated recommendation around what is going to be there to assist you and what's going to be necessary, for the coming year. And it was just so interesting kind of seeing him listen to all of that. And by the time that I stopped speaking about that, he was like, we have to update our schedules. Everyone has to update their schedule, as farther into the future that we know. And he said, it was just interesting. He's like, we have to keep them current too. We have to update them. And I'm like, yes, so that is these kind of eureka aha moments that people have. And so to bring it full circle, I would say it's, yes, articulate the value proposition, but don't stop with the highest level of leadership, right? So articulate it to leadership so that you get the support to build out what is needed, right? So maybe that is access to certain information. Maybe that is, getting your foot in the door to really understand certain key pieces of the strategy. Maybe it's tools, maybe it's more resource managers, whatever that might be, but explain it to every level of leadership. And most importantly, explain it to everyone in the organization. When they walk through the door on their first day, meet with them. I'm your resource manager. I'm here to help you. I'm here to understand what your career goals are so that I can help you achieve them. But if you don't tell me what they are, it's going to be really difficult for me to help you, get to that place. And so it's really taking that holistic approach in terms of, yes, understand the value proposition. Don't just assume that you know what it is. Because again, resource management to be successful, it's not about the success of resource management. It's about how to help the organization be successful through a strong resource management platform.
Yeah, and I love your reference to the Start with Why framework from Simon Sinek, and how that is so helpful and applicable to all sorts of levels that the resource management function is connected to. Absolutely love it. Awesome. Just looking at the time, it's about 12:40 now. So I think it would be a great moment to head over to our Q&A section. So a very gentle reminder to everyone to pose your questions in the Q&A, as we have been listening to Christine sharing her best practices. What questions might have come up for you? So we talked about best practice number 1 around personal connections with the people are key to the success of a resource manager, building trusted relationships by really listening, by really caring. We talked about best practice number 2 around securing leadership buy-in, and to make sure not to operate in a silo, but really articulate the value proposition that resource management can bring to all sorts of levels, including leadership. We talked about the shift from a more tactical to a strategic approach of resource managing and staffing, which is also a common theme that we touched upon in our last webinar with Tim and Nicole. So wonderful to hear that again being iterated by you, Christine. So to our audience, what questions do you have to Christine? Now is your chance to ask anything you might be curious about. And maybe just while we're waiting for people to input questions, Christine, I have a personal question. As you're quite, let's say, experienced, and you have been in your position for a number of years now, even though we can't see it, you have had many, many beautiful years of experience in this particular field. What is the reason you're still in this field? What inspires you to stick around in resource management?
Said it before, and I'll say it again. Resource management is the coolest job in the world. I have never even heard of another profession that is so uniquely positioned to focus on the strategy of an organization and really help to achieve that and be super people focused, right? It's usually a little bit more aligned one or the other, but resource management has that common thread across both. And I would say I'm kind of a little bit of an addict as it relates to instant gratification. And what I mean by that is it's really, really cool to experience having a connection with somebody and truly helping them in their career. That in itself is amazing. But to have that happen and then have a report come out that you've gone up a point in terms of meeting your goal that is
magical.
A huge driver. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Oh, so inspiring. Makes me want to become a resource manager. Thank you for sharing. And I can see that we've had some questions popping up in the Q&A. Thank you everyone for writing those down, and feel free to continue to do so. So let me just quickly check. We've got a beautiful question from, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Demetrio. What are the key metrics you recommend or you're using yourself for measuring the success of your work as a resource manager?
That is a fantastic question. And I go back to our best practices related to understand what is important to the organization. So certainly, absolutely, there are, as I said, best practices, right? So there's certain things like measuring utilization or productivity that go without saying. However, if it's most important to your organization right now to drive retention, perhaps that is a starting point in terms of measuring the employee experience and how can that really tie into the resource management process. I'd say, look, generally speaking, organizations have individuals set out goals at a certain part of the year. How is the resource management process contributing to those goals, right? If an individual has laid out 3 goals as it relates to the type of opportunity that they want to work on this year, have we delivered on that promise? So again, it's starting with what is important to the organization. What's a success look like there? That I would also say too, that if your organization, for example, maybe the most important thing to your organization is, and I'm making this up, right? Last year, they had a very unpredictable year and they want to be more precise this year about forecasting. That tells me that the metric that's important there is how accurate are your schedules? So are you scheduling? So it's interesting. I call it fake scheduling. So there is a phenomenon that exists within the resource management space of getting schedules in there, but if the schedules aren't accurate, and if you've predicted a certain thing that has not materialized and it happens week over week over week, that process is broken. So you need to really start looking at some metrics around not just predicting, but how good are your predictions, right? So if you have a huge level of leakage or variances week to week, that's something you're going to want to track. I would say success there is you're within a certain margin of error and you're able to predict with a high level of precision what your results are going to be weeks and even months in advance. So again, there are so many metrics that can be tracked. It's ensuring that you're tracking the metrics that are important to leadership. And again, if you're doing that, that's going to help to secure buy-in.
Wonderful. And it relates so well to your previous points too. And also, I just would like to highlight how beautiful I think it is to think about the people experience in this context and how resource management can potentially help in this space, because retention, quiet quitting, the great resignation have been phenomenon observed by many organizations around the globe in the recent month and years. So it's a very intriguing thought to think about how can resource management help to navigate those challenges in the business space. So I love it. Just try to orient your KPIs in regards to what the key strategic objective is. So that makes so much sense. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Let's see what other questions we have. That one might be nice, from Jennifer. So Jennifer is asking, is there a ratio for resource manager to number of resources that you found most helpful?
That is a great question. And I would say it is dependent on the industry. Certainly, I have seen anywhere from 75 to 200, maybe 125, 150-ish. And I say ish, not because I'm trying to be vague on purpose, but again, it's understanding what the business needs from you. So if there is a practice or a part of the organization that is very linear, perhaps it is more predictable, and it's kind of a set it and forget it in terms of when someone is staffed, let's say they are aligned to a project or an assignment for a year. I mean, this happens, right? So that may necessitate a little bit less in terms of the day-to-day interaction and the day-to-day kind of hand-to-hand combat, so to speak, of the resource management piece. Whereas if it's a highly volatile, highly unpredictable piece of the organization that and I've supported teams like this that, I mean, they didn't know what they were doing tomorrow, let alone 3 months from now, right? You're going to need a level of engagement that is much more frequent. And so I hesitate to give a generic kind of blanket number. I would say somewhere around there makes sense. But it also, again, there's some external factors there. So it's what are you trying to achieve, but also what tools do you have at your disposal, right? So if you have an archaic mechanism for being able to track everybody and you're, piecing it together with a spreadsheet, that in itself is going to cause you to have some delay there, right? So
absolutely.
Generally speaking, I would say the best way is try not to oversaturate your resource managers, because when you do that, you really start to dilute the value that they can bring, and it's not going to really help you to really articulate that value. Well, you can articulate the value proposition, but it'll be difficult to deliver on it.
Nice. Thank you very much, Christine. And just as a heads up for everyone, the questions that you will pose to the Q&A that we will not be able to answer in this session, we are actually going to do a recording for you to dive into all of the questions. So please feel free to continue to write them down. They will all be answered either right now in this live session or afterwards. So keep an eye out for our follow-up email with the recording of the extra Q&A too. Wonderful. And I can see that some questions even received a thumbs up. So I'm just trying to prioritize those too. So feel free to vote the ones up you find most interesting. So let's take this one from Michael. What are some ways you have addressed resistance or pushback by the business in an effort to truly partner with leadership to build trust and rapport?
Yeah, I, it's interesting. People not necessarily buying in right away. Shocking. Like, it is certainly
what that happens.
This does happen, and I do have experience in that area as well. My one piece of advice that I would offer here is understand why they are resistant. There is something that is causing them to resist and push back. Perhaps it is they have a fear that maybe they're protective of their people, and they have a concern that with some sort of a centralized function, their people on their team will no longer have the ability to have their voices be heard. It comes from a good place, right? Generally speaking, people don't have malicious intent at the leadership level.
That's a beautiful point.
They're looking to make the organization successful. So if you understand what is actually driving their resistance, you can then either tie it back to why that's not your intention, or be really clear with them and the leadership team that is sponsoring resource management about the fact that there's not alignment. It's not resource management's job necessarily to sell resource management. Our job is to implement it, to make it real, to make it successful. But it is our job to flag where there's a disconnect, and a disconnect in an understanding of what resource management is supposed to actually be doing. That's poison. So I would say really look for that as early as you can, and try to understand what's driving it so you can tackle it.
Nice. And maybe just referring back to the model you introduced earlier, start with why also could be applicable and helpful here. Start with why people are pushing back and really dig into that. And I love your framing around assuming people have good intentions. I think that's super helpful in connecting with people. Love it. Thank you, Christine. And thank you, Michelle, too, for the question. Wonderful. So I'm just going to browse through the questions. They're getting more and more. Very, very nice to see. So I'm just trying to pick one. I'm going to go with this one again. Thank you, Jennifer. How do you keep your resource managers motivated when you are short-staffed? I think this is a question very relevant as of today with, the war on talent and short staffing everywhere happening.
I'd say that starts with first looking for the key attributes that tie to the resource management profile, the ideal resource manager profile. Meaning, perhaps in 50 years from now, we will have a very robust, very formal build out of the resource management profession. And perhaps you'll be able to graduate from college with resource management on your diploma. And that will be fantastic. And that will be a different place than where we are today. Right now, it is not common, right, for people necessarily to have experience in resource management. Not to say that they don't, I'm living proof of that, right? But that's not necessarily going to be a good starting point for you because the market just simply isn't saturated with people with resource management experience. Instead, you'll need to look for resource manage, right? Look for the traits that are going to be similar to what is going to make someone successful in this space. So again, someone who is able to find excitement in the unknown as opposed to stress in the unknown. They're still going to be stressed. And any good manager will tell you that that is part of being a leader is helping your team and supporting your team during that time. But
nice.
Generally speaking, you're looking for people that find it exciting so I'll tell you, and I have a good friend of mine who I explained my job to once, and she said, that sounds terrible. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but I actually love it when I have kind of a solution kind of plotted out and I put the puzzle pieces together. I remember this when I was doing the staffing, right? And it turns out that the client wants something totally different, or the work got pushed back, or this happened, that happened. I find that very exciting. It's back to the drawing board, but it's like, what are we going to put together next? If your people are completely demotivated by that, I'd say start there. The other thing is really bring it back to what they're doing isn't staffing. It's not scheduling. It's not running a report. Those are all administrative tasks. What they're doing isn't the task. They're bringing so much more to the table than that. They're mapping out a career and shaping the future of what this industry is going to look like. And what's really cool about resource management is having a sense of, again, resource management is everywhere. So it gives you an inside look on the operations of an organization. And you have that sort of special knowledge of being able to have that people-centric side. So a lot of times as a resource manager, if you're doing your job correctly, you're thinking of these different solutions, and not to use a cliche of out of the box thinking, but you really are. It's kind of like, I'll tell you one, and I'll stop after this, but I'll tell you one piece of advice. I remember I had a junior resource manager come to me and she said, it's impossible. I can't, and it was, right? On paper, it was impossible. There was no one that had any sort of availability, that had the skill set to be able to do this new client that came up, which of course was a very important client. And I said, how exciting. Let's look at this together, right? So when no one has availability, everyone has availability, meaning they're all taken, right? They're all spoken for, right? So at this point, it's actually much easier. Let's look for who this opportunity is actually right for, because nothing else is kind of popping out, right? So we're able to kind of drill down from there and say, look, here is what this opportunity outlines. Let's draw upon our knowledge on everything else that we know about this organization. We've got these key performers that are looking for this opportunity. We have these 3 leaders who have, as of 6 months ago, been pounding the table that this individual needs to have this type of opportunity in order to get promoted, or perhaps they're a flight risk to the firm. So again, it's not resource management taking people, moving people, doing things. It's resource management coming to the table with, hi, leader, you said that you would like to see this happen for this person this year. I know that they're currently assigned. However, here's an opportunity to make that happen. Is that something you would like to pursue? And if it is, now you have a starting point to kind of put those puzzle pieces together. But again, you have to be someone who's excited by that. And that is, I'm told it's unique.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a challenge. You have to be very creative on top of, you know, being clever. So that sounds like a fascinating combination of skills, which you definitely present, I can already tell, which is so lovely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Christine, for generously sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience with us today. And to everyone, we will definitely dive into all the questions that are still remaining open. We will send you the recording along with the webinar recording, so you will get access to all of the questions and answers after the session. So again, thank you very much, Christine. It's been an absolute pleasure preparing and facilitating this webinar with you. For everyone joining us today, I would just like to highlight that we have another fantastic webinar coming up in October. On October 11th, we get the chance to speak with Kevin Martin. He's a phenomenal person, very inspiring. He is reading about 50 books every year and has been doing so since the 90s. So he is a walking library. He is very, very knowledgeable and very inspiring. Whenever he speaks, I learn a lot. So make sure to tune in on October the 11th on our topic, which is going to focus on resource planning using objectives and key results. And also just mentioning his book, Swimming in the Deep End, as a definite recommendation, just like, of course, Christine's blog, called Resource Management in the Wild. Make sure to check out both resources. Also, Christine and I agreed upfront that we would like to invite all of you to connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to talk about resource management and the future of resource management. So feel very invited to connect with Christine and also myself on LinkedIn to, maybe chat some more. And as a checkout question, what I would like to ask you is, which best practice has resonated most with you? Which best practice did you like best? Which best practice might you take away from today's session and implement in your own world? What has been most useful? All right, here we go. The volatility of resource management and the intersection with the human side. I love that point. Should resource managers be mindful about people's job stability and sense of security? Awesome. The shift from tactical to strategic. Love it, Taylor. Storytelling and the people-centric approach, connecting with people and knowing development goals. Yeah. And again, from John, move from tactical to strategic. Partnership with the people, getting smart about the business. Yeah. Resource manager as a facilitator for personal development, knowing your people and where your company practice is going. Yeah. So one key skill is definitely being a people person, being able to connect, to listen, to care, apart from all the other skills that are needed in today's world. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure running our second webinar. Very, very happy and full of gratitude in my heart. So thank you, everyone. And I'm wishing you a fantastic rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Take good care and see you soon.
Thank you.